The last light of a Friday evening in late June fell across Riverside Park in long amber bands, cutting through the chain-link backstop and laying itself down across the infield dirt, like something precious. The air smelled of cut grass and popcorn from the concession cart near the bleachers, and underneath that, the particular dusty sweetness of a baseball diamond that has been used all day. Parents crowded 3 and 4 deep along both baselines, some standing, some perched on folding chairs they had hauled from minivans and pickup trucks, all of them leaning forward in that collective posture that belongs only to the final inning of a game that nobody wanted to see end. The score was 4-3, 2 outs, bottom of the 6th, the Riverside Park Royals against the Garfield Street Tigers, under 12s. 112 children had played in this league since the season opened in April, and 24 of them were on that field right now, and every single one of them knew that something was about to happen that they would describe to someone years from now. Carlton Eugene Moss stood behind home plate in his navy blue umpire shirt, his chest protector, his mask pushed up on top of his head between pitches. He was 54 years old, broad across the shoulders, with hands that had seen everything from a basketball going through a gymnasium window to a student's first trophy hands that had signed 300 attendance sheets a year for 28 years. He stood with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that his body communicates authority whether he wants it to or not, and who has therefore learned to communicate carefully. His weight was distributed evenly between both feet. His breathing was slow. He had been doing this for 16 years, and he had learned somewhere around year 4 that the umpire who fidgets is the umpire the kids stop trusting. The Tigers had a runner on second and a runner on third. Their cleanup hitter, a 12-year-old named Marcus Webb, who had already grown to 5'7", and who Carlton had been watching since Marcus was 8 years old and played with his shoes on the wrong feet, stepped into the batter's box and tapped his cleats with the barrel of his bat. The Royals pitcher, a left-handed girl named Sophie Krause, who Carlton privately considered the best pitcher in the under-12 division, and possibly in the under-14 division as well, set herself on the rubber. Carlton watched Sophie's wind-up with the attention of someone who has officiated 2,000 games and knows that what matters is not what you see after the pitch, but what your eyes have already committed to before the ball leaves the hand. He read her mechanics the way he always read them, quickly and completely. And then the pitch came in, and Marcus swung, and the ball went into the gap between left and center, and both runners came home, and Marcus pulled into second base, standing, and the crowd erupted in the particular way that crowds at children's sporting events erupt, which is to say completely and without irony. The Royals led 5-4. Carlton raised both hands and called time. He walked the bases, checking the positions of the fielders, making sure everything was in order. 41 adults were watching him. Some of them had been watching him for the better part of a decade. Some of them had brought their oldest kids to this league when Carlton was already 2 years into his tenure here. He had called safe and out on those kids' older siblings. He had watched those siblings go to middle school and then to high school and then, in a few cases, come back to help coach. He knew the Riverside Park diamond, the way a man knows his own kitchen, where the soft spots were where the first base line ran a little crooked, where the drainage was bad when it rained. He also knew, without having to think about it, that the woman in the folding chair behind the third base dugout, Denise Okafor, was filming. She filmed every game. She had 4 boys in the league across 3 divisions, and she had told Carlton once with the cheerful frankness of a woman who has decided to stop apologizing for anything that she filmed. Everything because her memory was terrible and she wanted to be able to show the boys what they did right and what they did wrong. Her phone was out. She held it with both hands, the screen facing the field. Carlton returned to the plate. 1 more batter, 1 more out needed. The Royals' pitcher struck out the next hitter on 4 pitches. And just like that, it was the bottom of the 6th, and the Tigers were coming up to bat with the score tied at 5. What happened over the next 8 minutes would be talked about in every household associated with Riverside Park Little League for a long time after. Carlton would replay it in his mind many times in the way that a man replays not the traumatic parts of his life, but the moments just before them looking for the thing he might have done differently. He would find nothing. He had done his job. The Tigers sent up 3 hitters. The first 2 reached base on a single and a walk. The third, a boy named Tommy Garrett, who was not a strong hitter, but who Carlton had seen quietly improve all season in the patient way that children improve at things they truly love, worked the count to 3-2, and then hit a slow roller toward third. The Royals' third baseman fielded it cleanly through home. The throw was good. The runner from second came in hard. Carlton was in position. He had been moving toward the plate from the first base side since the ball was hit, getting the angle, getting low, doing what he had been trained to do and had practiced doing for 16 years. He watched the catcher receive the throw. He watched the runner's foot reach for the plate. He saw what he saw. He spread his arms wide and called safe. The Royals' catcher looked up at him. The Royals' dugout went quiet. The Royals' first baseman kicked at the dirt. And in the bleachers on the third base side, where the Royals' parents were concentrated, there was a short, collective sound, the sound of 40 people inhaling at the same moment, and then holding it, and then letting it out slowly through their teeth. Carlton did not look at the bleachers. He straightened up and signaled the time and looked at both benches and waited. This was the part of umpiring that the certification course covered in its final module, the management of the aftermath. The call is one thing. The 30 seconds after the call are another thing entirely. Carlton had learned to give people 30 seconds. He gave them 30 seconds now. The Tigers began to celebrate. The game was over. Tigers 6, Royals 5. And then Officer Derek Stannis came onto the field. Before any of that, though, before the officer and the accusation and the phones and the 47 seconds of footage that would change the trajectory of several people's lives, it is worth understanding who Carlton Eugene Moss was and why he was standing on that diamond at all. Carlton had grown up in a household where sports were a serious matter. His father, Eugene Moss Sr., had played semi-professional baseball in the late 1960s, a time when the structure of that world was shifting, but had not yet shifted enough to carry a man like Eugene Moss Sr. all the way to where his talent deserved to take him. Eugene Sr. had taught Carlton to throw a fastball in the backyard of their house on Delmont Street, and he had taught him something else at the same time, something he said out loud only once, but repeated in every other way he could find, that the game is bigger than any single outcome, and the person who keeps the game honest is doing something that matters. Carlton had played ball through high school, a decent outfielder, nothing spectacular. He went to a state college and got a degree in physical education because he knew by his sophomore year that what he wanted to do was teach. He wanted to be in the gym. He wanted to be the person standing between a group of 17-year-olds and chaos, not because he wanted power, but because he understood instinctively that someone had to hold that position, and he was suited for it, and he would be good at it. He was good at it. 28 years at Westside High School, the last 12 of them as department head. He coached the wrestling team for 11 years. He ran the intramural basketball league. He supervised study hall on Thursday afternoons. He knew the name of every student who passed through his gymnasium, not because he made a point of it, but because he was the kind of person who paid attention to people and people felt it and told him their names. He retired at 52, not because he was done with work, but because his wife Gloria had been asking him for 3 years what they were going to do with the back half of their lives. And the honest answer was that he had not been making enough space for her in the first half. He took a cooking class. He learned to make a decent pot roast. He drove Gloria to her appointments and then sat in the car and read the newspaper, which was something he had never had time to do before, and he found that he liked it very much. He also kept umpiring. He had started umpiring when his son Darnell was 8 years old and playing in the Riverside Park League. It had started the way most volunteer jobs start, which is to say that a man named Phil Guerrero had called out across the parking lot that they needed one more umpire for the Saturday games, and was Carlton doing anything, and Carlton had said no, he was not. And that was the beginning of it. He took the Little League Baseball umpire certification course. He liked the rules. He liked the clarity of them. He liked that there was a right answer, and that his job was to find it. After Darnell aged out of the league and went to high school and then college, Carlton kept coming. He took the course again when they updated the training materials. He took it a third time when the reporting requirements changed. Darnell had played on this exact field in these exact foul lines. He had batted in this batter's box and run the bases that Carlton now watched other children run. Carlton had never umpired Darnell's games because the league had a policy about it, and he agreed with the policy. But he had watched from the bleachers in his street clothes, and he had kept himself from calling anything out loud because that was not his place in those moments. He was a father in those moments. On the days he was not his son's father, he was the umpire, and the job meant the same thing either way. Keep it honest, keep it fair, stay in your lane. The current certification card was in his bag in the outer pocket in a small plastic sleeve. He had renewed it 8 months ago. He had done the online modules and the in-person training day, and the rules review, all of it. Not because anyone was checking, but because he believed that if you were going to hold authority over something, you owed it to the people subject to that authority to know what you were doing. He had driven 40 minutes each way to attend the training day. He had asked 3 questions during the session, and the instructor had told him afterward that they were good questions. On game days, Carlton arrived 45 minutes early. He walked the field himself, checking the bases, checking the batter's boxes, making sure the baseline chalk was visible. This was not required by the league. No rule said an umpire had to arrive 45 minutes before game time. Carlton arrived 45 minutes before game time because the field needed to be right before any child ran onto it, and because the preparation was part of the job even if the job description didn't say so. He believed in the particular way that former teachers believe things they have tested in classrooms over decades, that the physical environment communicated to children before anyone said a word, that a field with clean baselines and properly positioned bases told the kids standing in the dugout something about what this place expected of them. He had been the same way in the gymnasium. He would arrive before his students run through the equipment check, make sure the floor was clear and the lines were visible and the hoops were at the right height. He had done this not to impress anyone, but because it was correct, because the room should be ready before the people arrived, because preparation was a form of respect. His wife Gloria had noticed this about him very early. On their third date, she had arrived at a restaurant 20 minutes before their reservation time and found Carlton already there. Already seated, already having identified which table would give them the most comfortable conversation and spoken to the hostess about it. She had found this alternately charming and slightly alarming for the first year of their marriage, and then simply accurate after that. This was who he was. He arrived prepared. He stayed prepared. It had been Gloria who noticed in the years after Darnell grew up and out of the house that Carlton seemed lighter on game days than on any other days. He came home from officiating with a specific quality of tiredness that was different from the tiredness of work. It was the tiredness of having been fully occupied, fully present, fully in the exercise of something he was genuinely good at. She had told him once that she thought umpiring was the place where all his skills converged. The teaching and the athletics and the knowledge of rules and the ability to hold a room without raising his voice. He had said that she was probably right. It was one of the few times in his life he did not argue with a compliment. He talked to the coaches from both teams before the first pitch. Not a long talk. Just a check-in letting them know he was there and he was ready and that he expected a good game. He shook hands. He asked about the kids. He remembered which kids were new this season and which had been in the league for 3 or 4 years. He had watched 41 children in the Riverside Park League over the past 16 years move from Little League to middle school and then to high school and then, in the cases he was aware of, go on to college. He had watched them grow taller than him. He had called strikes on them when they were 8, and then watched them drive past him on Riverside Avenue when they were 16. He recognized them the way you recognize people who have passed through a place you love. Not because they were remarkable, though some of them were, but because the place was remarkable to him, and so everyone who had been part of it was part of what made it matter. This was the field where Carlton Eugene Moss stood when Officer Derek Stannis came toward him across the infield dirt in the long amber light of a Friday evening. Part 2. Stannis was 29 years old, and Carlton could see from the way he moved that he was the kind of 29-year-old who believed that his uniform said more about him than it actually did. He was not a large man, maybe 5'10", and he walked with the specific forward lean of someone who has decided that urgency is a form of authority. He was still in his patrol uniform because he had come from a security detail at a construction site on the south end of the Park District and had stopped at the game in time to watch the last 2 innings from behind the Tigers' dugout on the first base side. His son, Derek Jr., was 9 years old and played right field for the Royals. Carlton saw him coming and felt without analyzing it the particular quality of that approach. He had been a teacher for 28 years. He had had parents come at him across gymnasium floors and through classroom doorways and across school parking lots, and he had learned to read the approach before the words arrived. Stannis was not walking toward him to talk about the game. Stannis was walking toward him to do something with the way he felt about the game, and he had decided that Carlton was a useful place to put it. Carlton did not move. He stood where he was near home plate, his chest protector still on his mask pushed up. He had not yet begun to collect his equipment. He was giving the moment its proper time before he moved on to the next thing. Stannis stopped about 4 feet away from him. He said, "You need to come with me." Carlton looked at him. He took a breath that was slow enough to be a statement without being a provocation. He said, "I'm sorry, officer. Is there something I can help you with?" Stannis said, "You assaulted someone. You made contact. I'm placing you under investigative detention." There was a pause. Carlton let the pause be what it was. Around them, the celebration of the Tigers' win had stopped. The coaches were watching. The parents, who had begun moving toward the exit, had stopped moving. Denise Okafor had not moved her phone. Carlton said, "I don't believe that's accurate." Stannis said, "You turned and your arm hit me in the shoulder. That's contact. That's battery." Carlton understood then. He understood precisely and completely. When the safe call had been made and the crowd had reacted, Carlton had turned to address the field to signal time to manage the moment after the call. In turning, his right arm had made some degree of contact with someone to his left. He had not registered it as significant because it was not significant. When you are standing in a crowd, you make contact with people. When you are turning to perform an official function, your arm moves. He had not struck anyone. He had not pushed anyone. His arm had moved in the natural arc of his body, turning, and at some point in that arc it had touched the shoulder of Derek Stannis. He had not known that Stannis was standing that close to him. Stannis had moved up behind the plate after the pitch. Carlton looked at Stannis carefully. He looked at the uniform. He looked at the face of a 29-year-old man whose son had just lost a game on a call that Carlton knew with the calm certainty of 16 years of officiating and a current certification card in his bag was correct. He said, "Officer, I made a legal call in my capacity as a certified Little League umpire. I made no threatening contact with anyone on this field. I would be glad to discuss anything you witnessed, but I'm not going to agree to be detained for something that did not happen." His voice was level. He had taught himself to speak that way over a long career. Not because he did not feel things, but because he had learned that the feeling and the speaking were separate, and that the speaking had to be controlled in proportion to what the situation actually required. He was not performing calm. He was calm. Or rather, he was doing what he had always done, which was locate the calm underneath the feeling and speak from there. Stannis took a step closer. He said, "I'm an officer of the law, and I'm telling you that you made contact, and I'm giving you the opportunity to comply voluntarily, or I can call this in and have this handled differently." Carlton did not step back. This was a choice, and he made it deliberately. He had read in 28 years of working with young men who were testing where the walls were that stepping back from a challenge that did not deserve to be honored was not de-escalation. It was instruction. It told the person in front of you something about where you believed the walls were. Carlton had learned not to step back from things that were not real threats. He stepped away from things that were real. This was not real. He said, "I understand that you're an officer. I'm asking what specific grounds you have for detaining me." Someone in the crowd said something. Carlton did not look. He kept his eyes on Stannis. Stannis said, "I witnessed the contact myself. That gives me grounds." Carlton said, "Then I'd ask that you note that there are a number of other witnesses present who observed the same moment you did, and I'd expect their accounts to be part of any record you create." He said it without emphasis. He said it the way you say something that is simply true. In the bleachers, people were watching. The children from both teams were watching. Some of them were still in their uniforms, cleats on gloves hanging from their hands. They were at the age where they understood more than adults tended to give them credit for, and Carlton knew this better than almost anyone on that field. He thought standing there in the amber light with a uniformed officer 3 feet away from him and 41 pairs of adult eyes on him and several dozen children watching. This is a moment that is going to teach someone something. It is going to teach the children watching what an adult does when someone lies about him in public. It is going to teach them what it looks like to hold your ground without adding to the heat. He had not chosen this lesson. It had arrived. But he had spent 28 years understanding that the lessons children receive are not always the ones you plan, and the ones they remember longest are often the ones that come in the middle of ordinary afternoons. He stood where he was. He waited for what was coming next. Part 3. Stannis reached for his radio. The sound of the radio keying up was in that quiet field very loud. It cut through the ambient noise of the evening, the traffic on the boulevard 2 blocks away, the last few voices from the concession cart. The children in the bleachers heard it. The coaches heard it. The Tigers' third baseman, still holding his glove, a boy of 11 with grass stains on both knees, turned to look at his mother in the stands, and she gave him a look back that said, "Stay where you are." Stannis spoke into the radio. He said there was a situation at Riverside Park Little League. He gave his badge number. He said he needed a duty supervisor. Carlton listened to this and felt something that he would later try to describe accurately to his wife and find that the word he kept reaching for was weight. Not heaviness exactly. Weight. The specific weight of a situation that you did not create and cannot fully control descending on you. He had felt it before twice in his teaching career. Once when a parent had filed a formal complaint against him that turned out to be entirely without basis, and once when a student had accused him of favoritism in a way that was investigated and found to be unfounded. Both times the process had vindicated him completely. Both times the weight of the accusation had arrived before the vindication and had sat on him in the time between. He recognized the weight. He was standing on a field where he had volunteered his time for 16 years. He was standing near a home plate he had officiated from 100 times. He was wearing the same navy shirt he always wore on Friday evenings from April through July. He had his bag 30 feet away in the dugout, and in that bag was his certification card and his scorebook and the 2 extra clickers he always brought because clickers broke. He had done nothing wrong. He had made a correct call and then turned to manage the field, and his arm had moved in a natural arc and had touched the shoulder of a man standing too close to him, a man who was now treating that incidental contact as the grounds for a criminal accusation. He thought about the certification card in his bag. He had taken that course 3 times. He knew the rules. He knew the rule book the way most people know the map of the neighborhood they grew up in, not by reciting it, but by having moved through it enough times that it was simply part of how he understood the terrain. Parents had begun moving, not away, but closer. Not in an aggressive way, not in a mob way, but in the way that people move when they sense that something is happening that they have standing to observe. Denise Okafor was still filming. She had not lowered her phone at any point since the call at home plate. A man named Ray Kowalski, who was 45 years old and ran a small contracting business out of a white pickup truck, and who had been coming to Riverside Park games for 6 years because his son played right field for the Royals, had moved from his position behind the first base line to somewhere closer to home plate. Ray was a big man, not as broad as Carlton, but taller, with the forearms of someone who has worked construction for 2 decades. He was not moving in a threatening way. He was moving the way a person moves when he is no longer willing to be a bystander. His wife Sandra was still in her folding chair on the first base side. Her phone was also out. The Tigers coach, a woman named Maria Espinosa, who had been coaching this team for 3 years and who Carlton had a good professional relationship with, was standing at the edge of the dugout, watching. She had gathered her clipboard to her chest. She was watching Carlton very carefully. Carlton did not perform anything for any of these people. He was not staging his composure for an audience. But he was aware, as he had always been aware in front of students, that the quality of his presence in a difficult moment was itself a kind of communication. If he became agitated, the children watching would understand that agitation was appropriate. If he became angry, the children would understand that anger was appropriate. If he held still and let the situation develop without contributing to its heat, the children watching would understand that a person could do that it was possible, that it did not require the person to be weak or defeated or accepting of what was being done to him. It required the person to have a firm idea of who he was. Carlton had that. He had built it over a long time out of specific materials, 28 years of teaching, 16 years of officiating a father who had told him once and only once that the game is bigger than any single outcome and that the person who keeps it honest is doing something that matters. He had built it out of Gloria and Darnell and the particular way he felt when he drove to this field on a Friday evening in June and smelled the cut grass and saw the chalk lines and heard the sound of a ball hitting a glove. He had built it out of every moment he had chosen when he could have chosen otherwise. He stood in it now. Stannis was pacing slightly. Not much, just enough. It was the pace of a man who has made a commitment in public and is waiting for backup that will validate the commitment. Carlton recognized it. He had seen it in students who had made accusations they knew were inflated and who had then committed to the inflation because walking it back in public was harder than they had imagined. He thought, this is a scared young man who does not know how to lose a baseball game with his son watching. He felt no contempt for this. He felt something that was not quite sympathy, but was adjacent to it. He had spent his whole adult life working with people who were beneath their various surfaces scared. 17-year-olds were scared all the time. They expressed it as aggression, or as withdrawal, or as the particular bluster that this officer was now demonstrating the insistence that a small thing was a large thing, because making it large justified the feeling. Carlton had worked with that dynamic for 28 years. He did not hate people for it. He understood it as a feature of being human. What he could not do, had never been able to do, was pretend it was something other than what it was. The children in the bleachers were still watching. The boy from the Tigers who had scored the winning run, a 10-year-old named Joaquin, who Carlton had watched develop from a child who was afraid to run all the way to the plate, into a child who slid fearlessly and correctly, was watching Carlton with an expression that Carlton could not fully interpret from this distance, but which looked at a remove like bewilderment. Carlton thought, you are going to remember this afternoon, Joaquin. I cannot control what you take from it, but I can control what I put into it. He stood where he was. He kept his hands at his sides. He breathed. The radio crackled again. Backup was on the way. Among the spectators' voices were beginning to emerge. Not shouting, not yet, but the murmur of people who are deciding whether to remain spectators or to become participants. Carlton could hear the separate tones of it. The parents from the Royals' side who were angry at the call, some of whom probably felt privately that Stannis was doing something justified, and the parents from the Tigers' side who were confused and disturbed, and underneath all of it, The voices of the people who simply knew Carlton and had known him for years and were watching something happen to him that they recognized was wrong. Denise Okafor had not said anything yet. She was recording. Ray Kowalski had not said anything yet. He was watching. They were waiting the way people wait when they know something matters enough to get right. Part 4. There is a particular quality to being falsely accused in a place where you have spent years building trust. It is different from being accused among strangers. Among strangers, a false accusation is a problem to be solved, a misunderstanding to be corrected, a sequence of events to be set right. Among people who know you, a false accusation carries an additional freight, because you must stand in the middle of the people you have served and have them watch you. Be accused of something you did not do, and there is the possibility, however slim, that some of them might wonder. Carlton was aware of this. He had been aware of it from the moment Stannis said the word assault. He was aware that some of the Royals' parents who were still raw from the call at home plate might be susceptible to a narrative in which Carlton had done something improper. He was aware that the uniform Stannis was wearing carried a credibility that was not necessarily connected to the truth of what Stannis was saying. He was aware that the next few minutes were going to determine which version of events became the version that people left the park carrying. He had been in teaching long enough to know that the version of events people left with was shaped not only by facts, but by the quality of how the facts were presented and by who presented them and in what emotional register. A student who cried while making a false complaint was more likely to be believed in the immediate term than a teacher who remained composed while telling the truth. This was not because people were foolish. It was because emotion reads as evidence of conviction, and conviction reads as evidence of truth. Carlton had watched this dynamic play out in enough parent-teacher conferences and disciplinary hearings to understand it clearly. He did not panic, but he felt the situation's architecture. He thought about Darnell. His son was 32, now lived in Charlotte, worked in healthcare administration. He called on Sundays. He and Carlton talked about basketball and cooking and the weather and Darnell's 2 daughters, who were 6 and 4, and who Carlton and Gloria drove down to see 3 times a year. Darnell had played on this field 20 years ago. He had run these baselines. He had stood in that batter's box. Carlton had watched from the stands in his street clothes and had held himself very still because in those moments he was not the umpire, he was the father. He thought about what it would mean to call Darnell tonight and explain this. He would call him tonight either way because they talked most Fridays. And he would have to decide, as he always had to decide with Darnell, how much of the world's weight to pass along and how much to carry alone. He thought about Gloria. She had been patient with him through the whole second career, the Friday evenings, the Saturday mornings, the Tuesday make-up games. She had never complained, not genuinely, though she was entitled to. She had built her own life around his absence from it and then welcomed him back when he retired and they had found a new arrangement, a better one, more honest. She would be waiting for him. She always kept the porch light on when he drove home from games. He thought about the 16 years. Every game he had officiated on this field, every safe call and every out call and every disputed moment that had resolved because they always resolved into the next pitch or the next at-bat or the next game. He had never had a call protested through official channels. He had never had a coach file a formal objection with the league. He had had coaches argue with him on the field, of course, that was part of baseball. But none of them had ever taken it further, because they knew when they thought about it past the heat of the moment that Carlton's calls were accurate. He kept meticulous notes. He stayed current on the rules. He asked for feedback. And now he was standing in the middle of a field he loved in the golden hour light of a Friday evening in June, being accused by a 29-year-old officer who could not separate his son's loss from his own ego. Carlton thought about every parent he had seen do this across 28 years of teaching. The parent who could not separate their child's grade from their own pride. The parent who arrived at the principal's office not to understand what had happened, but to reverse it, because reversing it felt like love, and understanding it did not. He had sat across the table from those parents many times. He had learned in the way that classroom teachers learn things about human nature that no one else learns quite the same way, that when a person is carrying both love and wounded pride. The wounded pride almost always wins because love is slow, and pride is fast, and the meeting between the two rarely goes the way the slower emotion would prefer. Stannis loved his son. Carlton had no doubt about this. The boy had played a reasonably good game. He had tried hard. He had watched his team lose on a legitimate call by a fraction of a second, and his father in a police uniform had decided that this was something he could fix. Carlton was the thing Stannis had decided to fix it on. He thought about the children in the dugouts. He thought about Derek Jr. Stannis' son, who was 9 years old and had played right field today with genuine effort, and who would go home tonight and have dinner and go to bed, and who did not deserve to have his father's worst impulses attached to his name in whatever official record was about to be created. He thought about Marcus Webb, who had hit the go-ahead double with the easy authority of a 12-year-old who has found his stride in a sport and who was celebrating with his teammates on the far side of the field and who deserved to celebrate that without having to understand what was happening near home plate. Carlton was standing on a field where children were present. He was being accused of something he had not done in front of those children by a man in uniform. He understood what the children were learning right now, whether he liked it or not. He could not control that they were watching. He could only control what they saw when they watched him. It was, Carlton thought, an extraordinarily ordinary thing to have happened, not because it was small. It was not small. It was, in fact, very large. But it was ordinary in the sense that it happened all the time to people who were doing nothing more than doing their jobs correctly in the presence of someone who needed them to have done something wrong. Carlton was not unaware of the specific texture that his race gave this moment. He was a black man in a navy shirt being detained on a community baseball field by a white officer who was using a badge to amplify a feeling. He was aware of this the way he was aware of his own heartbeat, not as something he spent time analyzing, but as something that was simply true and that shaped the particular quality of the weight he was carrying. He had carried that weight in classrooms. He had carried it in parent meetings. He had carried it across 30 years of navigating institutions that were not designed with him in mind, and that required him to be consistently and without complaint twice as composed as anyone expected him to be. He was tired of it in the way that a person gets tired of something that never quite goes away, a low-grade tired that lives in the back of the chest and does not prevent you from doing the thing, but colors everything you do with a texture that those who do not carry the same weight do not feel. He stood there. He was Carlton Eugene Moss, 54 years old. He had the certification card in his bag. He had done the right thing. He would continue doing the right thing, and the truth of what had happened on this field was already in Denise Okafor's phone and in Sandra Kowalski's phone, and in the phone of at least one other parent he had noticed holding a screen up since the close play at home plate. The truth was already recorded. It was already there. He just had to stand in the middle of it until it arrived. He heard a car pulling up to the parking area adjacent to the field. He heard a car door. He heard footsteps on the gravel path that led from the parking area to the field. He did not turn to look. He waited. Part 5. Sergeant Patricia Vega was 47 years old and had been a duty supervisor in this district for 11 years. She was not tall, but she moved with the efficient precision of someone who has managed a great many unexpected situations, and has learned that the way you enter a room or a field tells people whether the situation is going to get better or worse. She came through the gate in the backstop and walked toward home plate and took in the situation with the particular comprehensive scan that experienced supervisors develop, which takes in not just the principals but the periphery, the crowd, the quality of the silence. She saw Carlton. She saw Stannis. She saw the crowd of parents arranged in an arc that was not quite confrontational but was not quite neutral either. She saw the children in the dugouts. She saw the phones. She stopped next to Stannis and spoke to him quietly. Carlton could not hear what she said. Whatever it was, Stannis answered in a voice that was more agitated than the situation required, and she listened without changing expression, and then she looked at Carlton. She said, "Sir, can you tell me what happened here from your perspective?" Carlton told her. He spoke precisely. He described the play at home plate, his call, his subsequent movement to manage the field, the incidental contact that had occurred when he turned. He described the incidental contact accurately, which is to say he described it as incidental contact because that is what it had been. He kept his account to the facts and the sequence, and he did not editorialize, and he did not raise his voice. Sergeant Vega listened. She then looked at Stannis. She said, "Officer Stannis, this is a community park event. There are children present. What is the specific factual basis for your detention of this individual?" Stannis said, "He made contact. I observed it directly." And that was when Denise Okafor said from 15 feet away in a voice that was neither hostile nor tentative, but simply clear as the amber evening light, as clear as a strike call, as clear as the kind of voice that has raised 4 boys and spent years sitting in bleachers and knows exactly when it is time to speak. "We have it on video, all of it, from 3 different angles. From 3 and..." Nobody moved for a moment. Sergeant Vega looked at her. Denise said, "I've been filming since the 7th inning. The whole thing is on my phone. The play, the call, the turn, the contact. All of it." And then Ray Kowalski, who had been standing quietly with his big contractor's forearms and his Sandra's phone in his left hand, stepped forward from the first base side, from the Royals side, from the side of the team that had just lost the game, and he said, "Carlton's arm never touched you in any way that counts as contact. My wife's phone has the whole thing. He turned and his arm brushed your shoulder. That's all. I was standing right there. I saw it." Stannis looked at Kowalski. Kowalski was looking back at him with the expression of a man who does not enjoy conflict, but has decided that this particular conflict is not one he is going to step away from. Vega said, "Can I see the footage?" Denise walked forward and held her phone out. The video was 47 seconds long. It began with the play at home plate, the ball coming in on the throw, the runner's foot touching the plate, Carlton's arms spreading wide with the safe call, the crowd's reaction, Carlton straightening up, Carlton beginning to turn to address the field, his right arm moving naturally in the arc of that turn, the back of Stannis' shoulder entering the frame from the left side, Carlton's forearm making contact with that shoulder, the contact that was on the footage, the contact of a sleeve against a uniform, the contact that lasts less than a half second and involves no force and produces no reaction in either body. Carlton continuing to turn, moving on to the next thing. Stannis visible in the frame, not stumbling, not reacting, just standing. Then the footage showed Stannis approaching Carlton. It showed him stopping 4 feet away. It showed him speaking. The audio was not perfect. The ambient crowd noise was present, but certain words were audible. The word contact was audible. The word detain was audible. Carlton's response was audible, at least in part. "I'm asking what specific grounds?" The 47 seconds ended there. Sergeant Vega watched it twice. The second time she watched it, Stannis was standing next to her, and he was also watching it, and Carlton was watching it too. And around them the crowd was watching, all 3 of them watching it, and the field was very quiet. When the video ended the second time, Vega looked at Stannis. The look was not theatrical. She did not make a speech. She simply said in the voice of someone whose authority derives not from a uniform, but from 11 years of being the person in the room who knows what happened, "Officer Stannis, stand down. This situation is over." Stannis opened his mouth. She said, "Stand down." He closed his mouth. Carlton watched this. He felt the weight shift. Not lift, not entirely, not yet, because weight like this does not lift in a moment. It lifts over days, over weeks, over the gradual accumulation of evidence that the world has not entirely abandoned the idea of fairness. But it shifted. He felt it shift. Vega turned to Carlton. She said, "I apologize for the disruption to your event, sir. You're free to go." Carlton said, "Thank you, Sergeant." He said nothing else. He did not make a speech. He did not perform anything. He walked to the dugout, took his bag from the bench, checked that his certification card was in the outer pocket, which it was slung the bag over his shoulder, and walked toward the parking lot. He did not hurry. He could hear behind him the voices of the crowd resuming. He could hear Denise saying something to someone near her. He could hear the Tigers' coach, Maria Espinoza, saying something in a low voice to her players. He heard at a distance Vega speaking to Stannis in a tone that was not a conversation. He got to his car. He put his bag in the trunk. He stood for a moment at the driver's side door and looked back at the field. The amber light was beginning to go copper now, the way it does in the last half hour before dark in June. The field looked the way it always looked at this hour, beautiful in its specific, ordinary, irreplaceable way. He got in the car. He drove home. He drove the same way he always drove down Riverside Avenue to the bridge and then left on Garfield and then through the neighborhood to Delmont Street, which was not the street where his parents had lived, but was the street where he and Gloria had lived for 23 years, and which always felt, when he turned onto it, like the end of something and the beginning of something else. The porch light was on. He sat in the driveway for a moment. He did not turn the car off right away. He sat in it and let the last hour settle into its proper shape. Let the adrenaline that he had not allowed himself to feel during the event find its way out through his hands, which he noticed were gripping the steering wheel slightly harder than necessary. He let them relax. He let the breathing slow the rest of the way. He turned off the car. He went inside. Gloria was in the kitchen. She looked at him when he came in. The look that is made possible only by decades of shared life. The look that takes in the whole person at once and reads the story and how they carry themselves. She said, "Rough game." He said something like that. She said, "You hungry?" He said yes. They sat at the kitchen table and she had made the chicken. He liked the one with the lemon and the garlic, and he ate it and told her some of it, not all of it, a version of it that carried the facts without the full weight of the afternoon. He told her about the play. He told her about Stannis. He told her about Denise and the phone and Sergeant Vega. He told it steadily and without drama because that was how Carlton told things, not to minimize them, but because drama was not the same as truth, and he had always preferred truth. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he was done, she looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Are you all right?" He thought about it. He said, "Yes, I will be." She said, "Good." She got up and cleared the plates, and he sat there at the kitchen table in the house on Delmont Street and listened to the ordinary sounds of the evening. The water running the neighbor's dog, the distant sound of a television through the open window. And he thought about the 47 seconds, and about Denise holding the phone out, and about Ray Kowalski stepping forward from the wrong side of the field to say something that needed to be said. He thought about that for a long time. Part 6. The formal complaint was filed on the following Monday. Carlton did not file it alone. Denise Okafor filed a statement. Ray Kowalski filed a statement. Sandra Kowalski filed a statement. Maria Espinoza, the Tigers' coach, filed a statement. Sergeant Patricia Vega's account of what she observed when she arrived at the field was part of the official record, and it was consistent with the video footage in every detail. The 47-second clip was submitted as part of the official complaint record. It was reviewed by the department's Internal Affairs Division and by a Civilian Oversight Committee. It was clear footage. The contact it depicted was as Ray Kowalski had described on the field, a forearm brushing a shoulder. The duration was approximately 0.3 of a second. There was no force involved. There was no reaction from either party that suggested force had been applied. The footage showed Carlton moving correctly and professionally throughout. Officer Derek Stannis received a formal reprimand. The department opened an inquiry into conduct unbecoming an officer. He was placed on administrative assignment for the duration of the inquiry. The findings of the inquiry were not released publicly, but their outcome was, which is to say that Stannis was reassigned to desk duty for 60 days and required to complete a professional conduct review before returning to field duty. His son, Derek Jr., was back on the field the following Saturday. because children are generally more resilient and more decent than the adults in their lives. Derek Jr. shook the hands of the kids on the other team after that game and then ran off to get a hot dog at the concession cart. Carlton did not observe any of this directly because he was not officiating Derek Jr.'s game that day, but he heard about it. The Riverside Park Little League Board issued a formal statement of support for Carlton Eugene Moss 5 days after the incident. The statement was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph described Carlton's 16 years of service to the league and his current certification status. The second paragraph described the events of the Friday evening game in terms consistent with what the footage and the witness statements showed. The third paragraph stated that the board considered Carlton in good standing, that they considered the accusation made against him to be without merit, and that they looked forward to continuing to work with him for as long as he was willing to serve the league. Carlton read the statement at his kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with his coffee. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the filing cabinet in his office in the same drawer where he kept his certification materials. The following Saturday was the first day of the second half of the regular season. Carlton was assigned to 2 games, a 9 and 10-year-old division game in the morning and a 12 and under game in the afternoon. He arrived 45 minutes early, as he always did. He walked the field, he chalked the boxes, he spoke to the coaches from both teams. When he walked out to home plate to begin the first game, the parents in the bleachers began to applaud. It was not a dramatic applause. It was not orchestrated. It started on one side of the bleachers, the Tigers' side, and then moved to the other side, and then it was simply everyone, both teams' families, people standing up from their folding chairs to clap for a 54-year-old man in a navy blue shirt who was walking to home plate to call balls and strikes. Some of them had their kids on their laps. Some of them were people Carlton recognized from years of Friday evenings and Saturday mornings. Some of them were newer to the league and were clapping because the people around them were clapping and because it was obviously right to do. Carlton stopped walking. He stood for a moment at the edge of the infield. He was not a man who performed emotion, and so what happened to his face in that moment was not performed. It was simply what was there. He had spent 16 years officiating on this field, and he had always understood his role as one that was by design and by necessity in the background. The umpire is not the story. The kids are the story. That was how it was supposed to work, and Carlton had been glad to have it work that way. He had not needed the recognition. He had the work itself. But the applause that came up from those bleachers on that Saturday morning was something different from recognition. It was a community saying, with the only instrument it had immediately available, that it had seen what happened, and it had rendered its verdict, and the verdict was on his side. It was parents from both teams, from the winning side and the losing side of the game, that had caused all of this standing up together in the summer morning light, and making a sound that said, "We know who you are, and we are not going to let someone tell us otherwise." Carlton raised one hand. Not a wave exactly. Just a hand raised toward the bleachers, the way you raise a hand toward something that deserves acknowledgement. Then he put his mask on and walked to the plate and called the coaches out for the pre-game meeting and got the game started. He called a good game that morning and a good game that afternoon. In the fall, his certification was renewed. He did the online modules on a Sunday afternoon in September, sitting at the kitchen table while Gloria watched a movie in the other room. He completed the rules review, which had a few updates related to safety protocols, and he made notes on the changes because he always made notes on the changes. He drove to the certification training day in October, which was held at a community center 40 minutes away, and he arrived early and sat in the second row and asked 2 questions during the session. On the drive home from the certification training, he thought about the 2 new candidates he had agreed to train. The league had put out a call for umpire volunteers the previous month, and Carlton had told the commissioner that he would be willing to work with new people to take them through the basics, to let them shadow him in real games, and then to shadow them in real games and to give them the kind of feedback that actually helped. 2 people had signed up. One was a woman named Patricia 38, who had a kid in the 9 and 10-year-old division, and had been watching games from the bleachers for 4 years and thought she could do the job. One was a young man named Jason, 23, who had played college baseball and was looking for a way to stay connected to the game. Carlton called them both that evening and told them to come to the early game the following Saturday. He would show them how he prepared, how he walked the field, how he talked to coaches, how he positioned himself for different plays. He told them that the most important thing in officiating was not knowing the rules, though they had to know the rules, but being the calmest person on the field. He said that the way you move and the way you stand and the way you speak all communicate before you say a word, and that the kids watch all of it all the time, and so you have to be consistent down to the way you take your stance behind the plate. He told them one more thing before he hung up. He told them that the job would occasionally put them in situations they did not choose and could not fully control, and that in those situations the most important thing was to know who they were. He said it plainly without elaboration because some things do not require elaboration. The children who had been in the bleachers at Riverside Park on that Friday evening in late June went home that night and did what children do, which is carry their impressions forward into their lives and deposit them somewhere in the structure of how they understand the world. They did not necessarily have words for what they had seen. They were 8 and 10 and 12 years old, but they had seen an adult man hold still under pressure. They had seen other adults, regular people from both sides of the bleachers, step forward and tell the truth. They had seen a piece of video footage play back on a phone, and they had seen a sergeant watch it and make a decision based on what it showed. They had seen a man pick up his bag and walk to his car without making a speech. Some of them would not think about that afternoon again for years. Some of them would think about it the next time they were in a situation where someone was trying to make them agree to something that was not true. Some of them would carry Carlton's stillness in their bodies without knowing where it came from, the way you carry the best things you learned in childhood in the muscle and the breath rather than the memory. One of them, a boy named Joaquin, who had scored the winning run for the Tigers and who had watched the whole thing with that expression of bewilderment that Carlton had noticed from a distance, asked his mother in the car on the way home what the policeman had been doing. His mother, who was a thoughtful woman and who drove the next 3 blocks in silence before answering, said that the policeman had been upset and had made a mistake, and that the people around him had helped him understand that it was a mistake. Joaquin asked if Carlton was going to be okay. His mother said yes. She said Carlton was going to be fine. She said Carlton was the kind of person who was always going to be fine. Denise Okafor saved the 47-second video in 3 separate locations. Her phone a cloud backup service, and an external hard drive she kept in her home office. She had submitted it as part of the official complaint record, but she kept her own copies because she had been in enough situations to understand that copies matter. The video was not dramatic footage. It showed a man turning. It showed a sleeve brushing a shoulder. It showed, if you watched it carefully, the precise quality of the incidental, the specific texture of a moment that was exactly what it appeared to be and nothing more. But it also showed Carlton managing the field after the call, his hands moving with the easy authority of someone who has done this many times and knows the next step. It showed, if you were paying attention, the posture of a man who knew who he was. Denise had been watching Carlton for years. She had 4 boys in the league, and she had seen him call games in the rain and in the heat, and in the particular chaos of the championship day, when 2 games overlapped and the parking lot was full and everybody's emotions were running high. She had watched him settle disputes between coaches with a word and a look. She had watched him kneel down to explain a call to a 9-year-old who didn't understand why he was out. She had watched him stay later than anyone else on the field to make sure the equipment was properly stowed and the field was left the way it should be left. When she had said on that Friday evening, "We have it on video, all of it, from 3 different angles," she had not planned it in advance. She had not prepared a speech. She had simply reached the point where the situation required someone to speak, and she was in possession of the relevant information, and she had spent 43 years developing the kind of life that made her the sort of person who spoke when speaking was what was needed. Ray Kowalski said something similar when his wife asked him later why he had stepped forward. He said that Carlton had been calling games on that field for as long as Ray had been bringing his boy to the league, and that the idea that Carlton had assaulted someone was so obviously untrue that letting it stand unchallenged would have felt like lying. He said that he had the information and he was standing there, and so he used it. He said it with the slight discomfort of someone who doesn't quite understand why what he did is being treated as remarkable. That quality of discomfort was, Carlton thought when he heard about it later, one of the most reassuring things he could imagine. A person who steps forward because something is obviously wrong and then struggles to explain why it required stepping forward is a person who has not constructed a heroic identity around the act, who has not cataloged it as a moment of courage for future reference. It was just the right thing. He had the information. He used it. The question of why this was being treated as extraordinary was itself a sign that Ray Kowalski's moral compass was working correctly. The league commissioner called Carlton on the Thursday after the incident. He called at 7 in the evening, which was careful the timing of a man who had thought about when to call and had decided that after dinner was respectful. He apologized. Not for anything the league had done, because the league had not done anything wrong, but for what Carlton had experienced. He said that the league's statement of support was being finalized and would be issued the following day, and that Carlton should know before the public statement that there was no uncertainty within the board about where they stood. Carlton thanked him. He meant it. He called his son Darnell after he hung up with the commissioner. Darnell lived in Charlotte now, worked in corporate finance, had 2 kids of his own. He was 31 years old and had become in the last decade the kind of adult child who called his parents regularly and who asked real questions about their lives rather than the surface questions that adult children sometimes use to discharge the obligation of calling. Carlton told him what had happened. He told it the same way he had told Gloria the facts, the sequence, without drama. Darnell was quiet for a moment and then said, "Are you going to keep doing it?" Carlton said, "Of course I am." Darnell said, "Good," and then Dad. Carlton said, "I know." He did know. He had been a teacher's son and a teacher and the father of a man who asked real questions, and he knew what was in the pause between Dad and the silence that followed it. He knew what Darnell was trying to say without knowing how to say it, which was that he was proud and frightened and relieved and furious in equal parts, and that all of those things were the correct response to the situation, and that Carlton being Carlton, which was to say that Carlton being exactly the person he had always been, was the thing Darnell was most grateful for. Carlton was back on the field the following spring. The league had its opening day in late April, and he was there 45 minutes early, walking the field, chalking the boxes, talking to coaches. Patricia, his new trainee, was with him, watching him do it, asking good questions. Jason came out for the afternoon game, and Carlton positioned him at third base for 2 innings to let him get the feel of calling plays from that angle. The grass was bright and new, the spring grass that hasn't been beaten down by summer yet, and the light was the particular clear light of April mornings that is different from any other light in the year. The first batter stepped in, and Carlton settled into his stance behind the plate, and the pitcher wound up and threw, and the game began. 41 parents were in the bleachers. Some of them had been there the previous summer on that Friday evening. Some of them were new. All of them were watching the game the way people watch games they care about, with the full and generous attention that we reserve for the things that mean something to us. The things that carry the irreplaceable texture of real-life children. Running baselines, a ball rising against a blue sky. An umpire in a navy shirt making a call with both arms spread wide. Carlton called the pitch. He called it fair. He had been doing this for 16 years, and he intended to do it for 16 more. This channel tells the stories of the people who hit record and the ones who were worth recording. Carlton Eugene Moss was worth recording. So was Denise Okafor, who kept her phone up. So was Ray Kowalski, who walked across the field from the wrong side to tell the truth. So were the 41 parents who were standing in the amber light of a Friday evening and chose when it mattered to be witnesses. There are people in every community who hold the line. They are not always famous. They are not always young. They are not always the people who make speeches or carry signs or organize large movements. Sometimes they are 54 years old and broad across the shoulders and deliberate in their movements, and they show up 45 minutes early to chalk the lines on a field where the grass smells sweet in the June heat, and the children are growing up in front of them, and they call the game fair, and they go home, and they come back the next Saturday and do it again. Those are the people worth recording. Those are the ones who are always worth recording. They have always been worth recording. The world is better when someone keeps the record honest, and Carlton Eugene Moss had been doing exactly that for 16 years, and he was not finished yet. The grass was different in spring. It always was. The winter ground gives up its deadness slowly, and then, all at once, and the first games of the new season carry that particular smell of renewal that Carlton had been breathing in for 16 years of spring openers. He stood behind home plate and listened to the sound of a bat connecting with a ball, that specific percussive crack that belongs only to baseball. That sounds different in a gymnasium or a back alley, that is complete only when it happens in this context on a real diamond. Under real sky, with real children running real bases, and he understood, as he had understood every opening day for 16 years, that this was where he was supposed to be. Carlton drove home on that first Saturday of the new spring season with the windows down and the radio on, something he rarely did, a small indulgence in the good feeling of a day that had gone the way a day should go. He took Riverside Avenue to the bridge and left on Garfield and through the neighborhood to Delmont Street. The porch light was on. It was always on. He sat in the driveway for a moment, as he sometimes did not, because he was troubled, but because he liked the transition. He liked the moment between the field and the house, the moment of sitting in the car with the engine off and feeling the two worlds settle into their proper relationship. The field with its chalk and its calls and its children and its occasional chaos. The house with its kitchen light and its Gloria and its pot roast and its Sunday phone calls from Charlotte. He was 54 years old. He had spent 28 years teaching and 16 years officiating, and the better part of a lifetime trying to be the kind of person who was worth the trust people placed in him. He had not always succeeded. He had made calls he second-guessed. He had said things in classrooms he wished he had said differently. He had not always been, even by his own standards, sufficient to the moment. But on the field at Riverside Park on a Friday evening in late June, with the amber light going copper, and a uniformed officer standing 3 feet away from him making a false claim, he had been exactly who he had spent his whole life trying to be. He had stood still. He had spoken the truth. He had waited for the facts to arrive. The facts had arrived. That was enough. He went inside. The light was on. Gloria was at the table with her book. She looked up and read his face the way she always did, and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Good game." And he said, "Good game." And that was enough, and it was everything, and the season stretched out ahead of him like a well-chalked baseline all the way to the far edge of the field. This channel tells the stories of the people who hit record and the ones who were worth recording.